Hi, I'm Mike Vladimir from Nascent. I'm here to tell you about all of our progress this year, but first, I want to start with what matters most, giving you the opportunity to try Nascent methodology firsthand. I'm running in-person workshops in August 2025 around the San Francisco Bay Area and in Portland, Oregon. The workshop is called You've Got an Idea for a Startup. Now what? Measure it in dollars. The workshop is free. You just need to sign up to secure your spot since we can't accept walk-ins due to building security. If you have an idea for a startup but no customers yet, come learn how to measure that idea in dollars so you can iterate and improve your idea for a startup. To be clear, these aren't lectures. You can't just watch this on YouTube. This is a hands-on workshop where you're going to work with real data to learn to make real decisions in seconds. Nascent is dramatically better than the status quo approach, where founders often spend months or years of their time or hundreds or thousands of their own dollars developing a startup idea, only to decide that it wasn't worth pursuing. With Nascent, we get you to a decision in seconds. Sign up on our Luma platform at lu.ma/nascent, NASCENT. That's lu.ma/NASCENT. You can also just Google Luma Nascent, and of course there's going to be a link in the show notes. If in-person workshops don't work for you, no worries. I'm also running webinars. You can just email me at workshop@nascentstartups.com, and we can easily figure out some scheduling. My next webinar is July 30th. It already has 9 people signed up and a waiting list of 2 more folks. So there will be more webinars, and we'll keep you in mind as we schedule more webinars going forward. So let's talk about the breakthrough. Let's talk about what happened since I last published on Substack 6 months ago, back in January 25. I feel like Nascent has had this huge breakthrough where Nascent addresses the ambivalence that most founders experience when they have an idea for a startup. On one hand, founders are excited and eager to build this business idea that they have. At the same time, they're often worried and uncertain about the viability of the idea. And they should be. Creating a startup is a huge investment of a founder's time and money. So the core question founders often need an answer to is this startup idea worth pursuing? Nascent is for founders who have the drive to create, but still feel that tension, that worry, that uncertainty about whether their investment might pay off. The best framing I've seen of this challenge comes from Paul Graham of Y Combinator. In his essay, Before the Startup, he talks about the importance of a good idea and his unique ability to evaluate startup ideas. Paul Graham writes, "I seem to have some sort of internal compass that helps me out. Maybe if I think about this more, I can come up with heuristics for recognizing genuinely interesting problems." Thanks, Paul. As far as I've seen, Paul Graham never actually published those heuristics, so until now, most founders have struggled to identify those genuinely interesting problems that are worth solving as a startup. My goal for Nascent is to be a universal version of that internal compass, and the results so far indicate that we've made a huge step forward in accomplishing that goal. So let's talk about some concrete results. Since March, I've taught Nascent methodology to 100 participants across 10 workshops. The workshop centers on a case study where the participants play the role of a founder who has an idea to create a startup. At the beginning of the workshop, I ask all the participants how they would decide whether to pursue this startup idea. Participants tell me they would do stuff like size the market, or look at competitors, or run interviews, or ask, an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude. But when I dig into the details and I say, okay, great, do that. What does that actually mean? How do you actually make sense of the outcome and make a decision on what you got to do next? Nobody really has specific steps. What they're saying is vague and unactionable. And it's pretty consistent with the status quo. Again, this is why it's really common for founders to spend so much time and so much money working on a startup idea. What's powerful to me about these workshops is that by the end of the workshop, and it's a 2-hour workshop, almost all of those 100 participants were able to evaluate that same startup idea again and decide within seconds how they want to move forward. To be clear, not everyone reaches the same conclusion. Some participants say, this is a weak idea, I'm going to kill it. Others say, there's totally an opportunity here. You just have to pivot and focus on this one specific aspect of the idea. Others just need more data. And all of those participants are right. There's no single right answer with Nascent. I don't care about any one specific decision. What I care about is decisiveness. My goal with Nascent is to drive founders' decisiveness, not their decisions. So just to be explicit, I don't care about your startup idea. I don't care whether or not you pursue your startup. I am just obsessed with getting you to be decisive and not waste lots of time and money. So here's some testimonials from participants from these 100 people I've talked about. A gentleman named Doug came to my workshop here in Portland in June. At that point, he'd been working on his startup idea for about 2 months, and he was planning to spend at least another 2 months building this idea. He attended my workshop, and by the end of the day, he had decided to stop working. Here's what Doug wrote to me afterwards. Nascent methodology gave me exactly what I needed, the clarity to pull the plug on 2 flailing projects. If your venture is still just an idea with no product and no customers, and you're unsure what to do next, check out the Nascent framework. It cuts through the noise. Thanks, Doug. Here's another testimonial from Pana, who attended the workshop at Emory University in Atlanta. Pana said, I thought that was an awesome presentation. I've attended every single workshop since the beginning of last year. I think this is the best one. Efcharisto, Pana. And Rizky, the program coordinator at the Hatchery, the entrepreneurial support organization at Emory University where I presented, said, I love how applicable so many of the frameworks are to different situations. I think there are always people saying they have these one-size-fits-all solutions, but with Nascent, you have Legos. You can build with it, and that's really valuable. So thank you very much, workshop participants. Let's now transition to the business model for Nascent, because as much as I want to help founders, I also hope to turn Nascent into a business. So I see Nascent as addressing a 3-layer ecosystem. At the base, you have founders, and obviously those are fundamentally the people I want to help. Hopefully you listening to me right now. Above the founders, you have entrepreneurial support organizations, sometimes called ESOs. They could come through a university or an economic development organization funded by the state. Basically, when founders have this idea and they're not sure what to do, there are resources for them, typically in the form of these entrepreneurial support organizations that want to help those founders grow those ideas into meaningful businesses that grow the economy and make the world a better place. And those ESOs, those entrepreneurial support organizations, often get their funding from donors like a state government or somebody who has lots of money and wants to help grow their local economy, or even corporate sponsors. So as I've been meeting with these leaders from these entrepreneurial support organizations, I've tried to ask them, how do they measure their programs? Obviously, they want to help founders, but how do they know if they're doing it? And the answer I seem to get is that they use vibes, like they measure with vibes. So that means testimonials from founders, satisfaction scores on a survey, counting how many meetings a founder might have had with the entrepreneurial support staff. I'm still trying to gather more data. These are very preliminary findings, but if this holds true, if this really is the status quo out there, then I really hope that Nascent will enable these entrepreneurial support organizations and the entities that fund them to go from measurement in vibes to measurement in dollars. Specifically, one output that I think would be especially useful for that audience is this output that Nascent generates called the estimated revenue next year from the ground up with no customers. Estimated revenue next year, the acronym is ERNY, ERNY. It's a fun word that people seem to like to pronounce. So that ERNY value is really impactful for both founders and ESO leaders and their funders when it comes to making decisions and evaluating, are the startups actually doing anything meaningful? Last week, I ran a workshop for 12 participants here in Portland. And when I talked to the audience about this ERNY value, a few of the people, like literally their eyes just like bulged out of their head. They're like, how's that even possible? That's nuts. That's crazy. If you feel like that, yes, it is really possible. Come to the workshop. It takes me about 2 hours and you'll see how it goes. So let's talk now about my goals for 2025 with Nascent. Right now it's the end of July. And my goal for the rest of the year is to just try to prove the value for Nascent. I think it could be valuable, but if you put a gun to my head, I can't really prove it in a meaningful way. So I want to measure the output for Nascent by how many decisions can I help founders make, how much ERNY value can we generate in dollars. Those are some of the metrics I hope to calculate over the coming months. So I keep talking about nascent in these broad strokes. And yes, to get into the meat, you need to do the 2-hour workshop, but I can at least give you an elevator pitch. If you're wondering how is nascent different from everything else that's out there, like lean startup or jobs to be done, I'm very far from the first person to talk about entrepreneurship. So nascent is different from conventional approaches in at least 3 ways. First, nascent embraces the lack of customers. Second, nascent insists on ground truth and raw data. And third, nascent leverages content analysis to ensure that we have a repeatable process, that the data analysis is meaningful. So let's dig into 1, 2, and 3. So number 1, nascent reframes conventional startup strategy. It's very, very common for founders with just an idea to talk about customers. Startups have always had this kind of blurred line between whether or not they have customers. And with nascent, we say, no, startups with customers face different challenges than startups with no customers. And founders who are blurring those lines, they're doing the fake it till you make it. And so with nascent, we say, you don't need to do that anymore. We really want you as a founder with just an idea to embrace that you have no customers. So when I talk to a founder and they say to me, I got some customers, I say, okay, tell me about your customers. And they go, I met this guy for 2 seconds and he paid me no money. And I go, is he really a customer then? And they say, not really. I'm just kind of faking it. So one thing we do with nascent is just get rid of that noise. We embrace the lack of customers. In fact, we want founders to adopt a new mentality. We say, look, anyone who's ever been a customer of anything began as a person in pain. Customers are visible. Customers are easy to see. They're the ones with the cash in hand, paying. You could see them buying things, but people in pain are invisible. So don't worry about customers. See if you can find any people in pain. And if you can't find people in pain, it's a good sign that the startup might not work. And if you can find the people in pain, we can quantify that pain and size the opportunity for the startup. So once we've quantified the pain, we can create a data visualization called the quantified pain graph. We can also calculate that ERNIE value I mentioned, the estimated revenue next year from the ground up with no customers. And those tools, those outputs were really helpful for the 100 founders, the 100 participants in the workshop in deciding how to evaluate the startup idea. So that's number 1, embrace no customers and use that to search for people in pain. Number 2, we focus on ground truth and raw data. So in conventional startup strategy, founders self-report what they've learned in their interviews. So with nascent, we strongly agree with the concepts behind customer discovery and running interviews. But what we want to do is yes and that. We want to say, yes, get out of the building and run interviews, and you must record the interviews. We do not trust what someone remembers, or we definitely don't trust their notes. With nascent, memory and notes, we just call that BS. Humans introduce errors. Let's embrace this rather than try to paper over it. So because humans introduce errors, we only work with recorded interviews. So founders have a way to correct their mistakes. So if a founder thinks that they heard something, we can always go back to the ground truth and say, what did the interviewee really say? Did their quote really indicate meaningful pain? And once we have that quote, we can quantify it really specifically. And then the third thing that makes nascent very different from conventional strategies is the use of content analysis. So you've probably not heard of content analysis. I only learned about it recently. But the challenge that it addresses is something ubiquitous for any founder who runs an interview. So the conventional way that a founder is told to analyze an interview is to look for something like, did the interviewee's pupils dilate? Like look at their eyes, and if they have dilated pupils, then you're saying something that really resonates with them. But how often does that actually happen? And more importantly, how consistently can founders identify whether or not that phenomenon even happens? This is where content analysis comes in. This is invented by a guy named Klaus Krippendorff. And so the idea with content analysis is that as founders, we're trying to go from unstructured interview data to structured data that gives us some sense of whether the interviewee could become a customer. So in nascent methodology, this means taking that interview and trying to categorize whether that interviewee has meaningful pain. So going from unstructured data to structured data, it's not so easy. It's really easy to trick yourself that you're doing something meaningful when you're not. So here's a little thought experiment for you. So let's say that we have a bunch of interviews and we want to structure them and categorize the pain. The easiest thing that we could do is to literally throw away the interview data, not listen to a single second of a single interviewee speaking. And instead, all we do is we say for, this first interview, we're going to flip a coin, and one side of the coin says hurting and the other side of the coin says not hurting. And based on the coin flips, we're going to call that our categorization of, the interviewee's pain, or how much of a chance is it that this person could become a customer someday? Obviously, coin flips are not a useful way of analyzing the data, and nobody would want to do that. However, what this mental idea of coin flips shows us is we got to be really careful, because we could create a system that's similar, that just is basically the equivalent of flipping a coin, and we trick ourselves. And so we really want to be careful as founders not to trick ourselves. And so we got to ask, how do we know whether any data analysis scheme is essentially a coin flip? And this is the idea behind content analysis. This guy who invented it, Klaus Krippendorf, he identified this key metric as inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability means that if you have multiple people analyzing that same interview, how consistent are they in categorizing the interviewee's pain? And the way we measure that is with a value called Krippendorf's alpha that ranges anywhere from 0 to 1. So if the K alpha value is above, 0.67, that's acceptable. If it's above 0.8, that shows high reliability. And what I've done with these first 100 workshop participants is I've measured the K alpha for the way that they were categorizing the interviewee's pain using this nascent methodology. And I'm really proud to say that the K alpha value for nascent is 0.9. And again, 0.8 indicates high reliability, 0.9 is above 0.8. So I have a lot of confidence right now, based on this limited data set, that we're doing a meaningful data analysis. We're not just having interviewees do the equivalent of coin flips. And so as founders, if you want to apply nascent methodology, you can now have confidence that when you use nascent to go from unstructured interview data to structured quantified data in dollars, that there's a systematic approach, it's a consistent approach, and it's going to yield meaningful results. And this is the foundation that enables nascent to deliver these values of the quantified pain graph and that estimated revenue next year from the ground up with no customers. So I'll take a step back and say that, of course, there are some limitations to nascent. There's a lot of factors that go into a founder's decision about whether or not they want to pursue a startup idea or stop work. So stuff that I've seen in my experience working with founders is how personally are they connected to the problem? Did this problem affect them personally or someone in their family? When that happens, often the founder is a lot more dedicated to the startup than not. And another issue is the founder's financial situation. Do they have to get paid next month, or can they go a few years without income? That also affects very strongly whether or not they pursue the idea. So, of course, the earning value, the quantified pain graph, these are just some of the inputs that will drive a founder's decision. But what's special to me about nascent is in that workshop for these 100 participants, they were able to use these outputs from nascent to be really decisive in evaluating the startup idea. So if all of this resonates with you and you've been listening to me, you're like, okay, nascent sounds different. Mike, I want to learn it. I'll at least give you 2 hours of my time. Here's how you get involved. So in Portland, coming up on Sunday, August 3rd and Monday, August 4th, I'm going to be running workshops at the Metro Region Innovation Hub on the campus of Portland State University. So I want to give a huge thank you to Asad Butt. He's the executive director of the Metro Hub. We're going to be doing the same workshop on 2 days, one on Sunday, one on Monday. The hope is that we can get more founders to attend by doing it more than once. And as a founder, if you participate in one of these workshops, you can join a cohort of founders who are going to be applying nascent methodology to their startups. Recording interviews over the months of August and September and applying this methodology to categorize the pain and figure out what is the estimated revenue next year from the ground up with no customers. So I'm really excited that Nascent and Metro Hub are partnering on both the workshops and the cohort. Thank you again, Asad. For those of you in the Bay Area, my old home, I miss the Bay so much. On Monday, August 11th, I'm going to be running a workshop at Wilson Sonsini in their office near the Ferry Building. Huge thanks to Kevin Lau for hosting. On Tuesday, August 12th, there'll be a workshop at Goodwin Proctor in Redwood City on the peninsula. Thank you very much to Craig Schmitz, lawyer extraordinaire, for hosting. If anyone needs a lawyer, I highly recommend Craig from Goodwin. And then on Friday, August 15th, I'll be running a workshop at Packard Innovation in Sunnyvale in the South Bay. So that's near Levi Stadium if you're in that area. Thank you very much to Paul Konasevich for hosting as well. So if any of these workshops interest you, you got to go to our Luma account. That's lu.ma/NASCENT, Luma/nascent. So you can try the methodology firsthand. Please try my nascent methodology. Or you can email me at workshop@nascentstartups.com and we'll find another time for you to get engaged. Last, I just want to give a huge shout out to Paul Tepper. Big thanks to Paul. He's the one who taught me about content analysis. I've done my best to summarize what Paul taught me. If I mischaracterized anything, that's on me, not on him. And yeah, I'm Mike. I'm from Nascent. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you at the next workshop.